we've had clients that are taking out a mortgage and they go, I know I have this much in my savings account, but actually I want to keep aside $50,000 because we want to go through IVF, or we want to, it's not weird. Like, it's part of your budget. Family planning is part of your life.
Oh, that's one of the main things. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's one of the main things I ask people about when I first have a discovery meeting with them. The things that we talk about, this might help some people. If you're sitting down with your partner and thinking about your goals, the main things we touch on are, where are you living? Are you happy there for the foreseeable future? Or do you plan to move? So owner occupied home, what's your lifestyle like now, and are you happy with it? Future you. So when are we retiring? Are we looking at part-time? Are we working to 65, etc.? And do you have kids, or do you want kids in the near future? So that is always a question I ask people. Like, if you've got kids, how do you want to help them? Or are kids in the plan somewhere?
Welcome to Checks and Balances. This is Michaela and Jess, and we are back with another much anticipated episode of the Takeover. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, today we are talking about the financial side of infertility. So, we're looking at IVF, the cost of freezing eggs, and surrogacy as well here and overseas. So I think it's really important just to sort of start this off by saying Michaela and I don't have personal experience with this process yet. And when it comes to there's obviously a lot more to this than the money. I'd say most of this is around, the emotional side, the physical side. There's so much that goes into this process, and we're not going to cover that as much today. It's more going to be on the costs and the finances. But if you did, there are some amazing resources out there if you're going through this yourself. I know that Chloe Fisher does Darling Shine podcast, where she talks a lot about her own journey with IVF and that process, and is really, really open about her experiences. So, that might be another good resource for people, I think, if you don't want to just focus on the money side of it.
We just thought it would be interesting. We're both, I'll out us as being in our 30s.
Yeah.
You start thinking about your career versus kids. Maybe you want to wait a bit longer. And with the waiting sometimes comes with costs, egg freezing, like you said, IVF. So we just thought it'd be really interesting to learn a bit about what that costs in New Zealand compared to other countries, and a lot of the ins and outs and the fees involved.
Yeah, this has been a learning for us too. Like, we're definitely not claiming to know everything about this process at all. It was more a case of us researching it and wanting to pass that on to you as well. IVF is now a mainstream medical intervention for infertility. People are definitely more prepared to seek help earlier. And we found some information that said the Australian-New Zealand fertility service market generated $709 million in 2018 and is projected to reach $1 billion by 2026.
That's actually crazy. Like, I mean, I don't have kids, you don't have kids, but I haven't really thought about the cost associated if I can't have kids.
Totally, I know.
And as a market in general, as a country, like $1 billion is insane.
Yeah, I'm absolutely banking on, like, I have not made room in the budget for IVF or egg freezing. Like, that is not in the plan.
Very true.
And like, you and I have both had other things that we've been focusing on in our 20s, in our early 30s, as far as getting married. We've both gotten married recently, so that's been a pretty big cost. We've both bought houses. That's expensive. We've now got mortgages.
Yeah.
So there's not a whole lot of space, available for other stuff like this, which we're kind of probably.
Well, and then you think about, you've got the mortgage now, and that's a huge cost. Where do you fit in? Well, the cost of having a child in the first place.
Yeah.
But then if you have to factor in getting the child, I don't know how to describe that.
This is definitely not something I've thought
the
about.
baby's going to cost you, and potentially the whole process to get to the baby is going to cost you.
Exactly. So this is kind of also shedding light on the number of women who are freezing their eggs. There's a huge spike in the number of women freezing their eggs, 61% spike, and a higher success rate as well with frozen embryos, which is positive.
I do hear a lot more women talking about freezing their eggs. I don't have many friends that I've heard talk about like IVF, but the egg freezing in your like mid 20s to 30s, just as like a safety net, if you've got the money to do it, I guess, why not?
Yeah, definitely. I remember sitting down to a dinner when I was I think I was 25, and I was sat next to a gynecologist. She does all of this stuff for a job, and she was like, in my ear, she's like, you should be freezing your eggs. And at the time I was thinking, what? But now, I see what she means. Like, I'm now 33.
You're like 25 at the pub and you're like, I don't have money for this.
I do not need to think about freezing my eggs. But yeah, now I'm 33 and I think I'm someone that's I've been on the fence about kids for a long time, and I'm still kind of on the fence. Like, I think a lot of people have said, oh, there's a moment where you go, oh, yep, now I'm ready. And it still hasn't happened. I'm 33. Unfortunately, there is that biological aspect where the time is a factor.
Ticking.
Yeah, we always get told that. And it is, to be fair, true. From our 30s, our fertility starts to decline. 35, you're a geriatric pregnancy.
Yeah, which is offensive, by the way.
But I mean, medically correct. So, I sort of feel like it's one of those things. If you're on the fence and you think, oh, I want to focus on my career, I want to travel, I've got other things I want to do before starting a family, then freezing eggs could be a good thing to start factoring into your budget and your plan.
Yeah, definitely. I also wondered, like, because we had obviously a pandemic not too long ago, and that was almost about 3 years of like your career and your just living life lost, sort of. But 3 years in terms of like, I don't want to say like your fertile window. Like that's a lot of years though, actually, because now you're having to make up lost time in your career, which is probably going to push back like when you want to have kids. So I wonder if having that pandemic really pushed a lot of women to go the egg freezing route because you've like lost all that time.
Or you feel as if you've been robbed to some degree of the time, like that you could have been travel. I mean, I keep saying travel because that's what I was doing.
I'm like career and you're like, no, travel.
Which it could be both. So the wait list for publicly funded IVF, so circling back to where people are at with this, if you can get publicly funded IVF, the waiting list is 1 to 2 years. So I think that's why people are starting to look at the cost to themselves personally if they don't have time or it doesn't fit with the schedule of what they want to do. And private treatment is really expensive.
Yeah. And publicly funded IVF, like when we were looking into this, you have to kind of go to the doctor and find out if you're even eligible for public funding. It's not like you can just go on a website and do like a little questionnaire and it's like, great, you'll be approved. It's more complicated than that. You have to speak to someone. So in terms of access to care, if you've budgeted the funds to just go and do it rather than having to go through the public system and all this waiting and things like that, like why not?
Yeah. And it is quite interesting. Like you say, they don't really advertise what eligible for public funding means exactly. So they don't outwardly be like, oh yeah, you tick this box. But the things that we know that they do look at is your BMI, which I thought was really interesting, your age, whether you smoke, whether you've already got children, and how long you've been trying to get pregnant. So some of these things are what you can expect to be asked about. If you get the public funding, like we said, 1 to 2 year waiting list. Now, for those people that aren't eligible or don't want to wait, let's dig into the cost of IVF.
Okay, so the numbers on the IVF sort of procedure as a whole, and these are very general numbers, like obviously it can go from one end to way up there, and it probably also depends on the clinic you choose. But so stage 1, we have medication and monitoring. So this is before you do any of like the egg extraction. I'm not a doctor, sorry. But you have to take a lot of medications to make sure you're in like the right place for the embryo transfer. And that can range anywhere from like $3,000 to $7,000 from what we looked at. I'm sure it can probably go above that as well, depending on, your health background and if you need additional medications.
Yeah. When I was doing some more research for this, these costs don't include other things like supplements, travel costs. There's a whole lot that goes into this over and above just the fees that you pay.
Travel costs too. Like if you live in a small town or something and you've got to come to Auckland or wherever to get this done, that's
Yeah.
also going to
Even
cost
pregnancy tests, like pregnancy tests are expensive.
you. They are.
They add up if you're using a bunch of those.
Yeah.
So that's stage 1. Stage 2, so the egg collection and embryology stage, the base fee for that is around $7,000. So that's another chunk. And then the embryo transfer stage 3, we're looking at $2,800 to $3,000 for that. So in total, this process, start to finish, can be between $13,000 and $17,000 for IVF.
And probably much higher than that too. Like, we've gone pretty general with the numbers, but I wouldn't be surprised if you can go quite far past that 17 grand figure as well.
For sure.
Although all in all, this is cheaper than I was
agree.
expecting.
I thought it was more expensive. So I dug into Reddit because I was like, this is going to be anecdotal stories of what actually people have experienced. But I think at the end of the day, people were saying they're spending $80,000.
80,000. Oh, is that in US or
no,
New Zealand?
in New Zealand. So this could be multiple rounds. It could be, like we said, all the additional costs.
Yeah.
Maybe this works first time round. Maybe you have to go through several rounds, and that's how this ends up racking up to be.
I guess
so
that's
expensive.
true. Like, this is this stage 1, 2, 3 we've listed out. That's one round, and if you have to do it more than once, which I do think most people do, from what I've heard. Yeah, that's crazy cost.
Yeah, it does add up for sure. Yeah, because I thought the same thing. And I think what this comes down to as well, when we do our financial planning and things like that, we always say money is just a tool to help you live the life you want to live. And what this comes back to is, what are your goals? What's important to you? And if having a family is important to you, let's say you're having to prioritize, do we go off and have our, 200-person wedding, or do we want to have a crack at having a child? It's a case of prioritizing, making sure that you're on the same page with your goals and sitting down and prioritizing them and making sure you're planning for this stuff, because it is not a small cost for most people. And I think we have to acknowledge that there is this financial barrier for a lot of people that actually just won't even be able to consider this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're listening to this and like, these are big numbers, this isn't a cheap thing. And we know that not everyone will be able to access that, but I guess that's why we have the publicly funded option if you qualify. Which also brings us to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is, have you ever heard of fertility tourism?
I had not heard of this, but it does make sense because people travel for all sorts of procedures, right? We've heard of turkey teeth.
Oh my God.
People in the UK go to Turkey to get their teeth done, hair transplants. I've heard of Thailand for nose jobs and boob jobs, the rest of it. So fertility tourism, I can understand why people are seeking out cheaper alternatives overseas.
Yeah. And I like, just as an example, so obviously in the US, this type of stuff is going to be really expensive because we're not going to crap on the US health system, but healthcare is expensive over there. So in the US, a round of IVF can cost up to $40,000.
Wow.
But in Barbados, shout out to the Caribbean, my people, it's $10,500 US dollars for a round of IVF. That's such a huge difference. Like, if you hopped on a plane, if you lived in the States, for example, to Barbados, even with the plane ticket and hotel costs, you're still paying much less.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say you get a holiday out of it, but to be honest, this process does not feel like a holiday.
Not a pleasant
whatsoever.
holiday.
Yeah. No. And I think that the extreme costs also giving rise to quite scammy situations too. I found a piece that One News had done on this was New Zealand based, where a woman was looking at alternative options to IVF. She was on her own. She wanted to have a child. Things were out of reach. She wasn't eligible. She wanted to speed up the process, basically. So she looked at other options, and there was this guy willing to be a sperm donor. It ended up that they were emailing back and forth for a couple of months, and he was basically roping her into coming to his house and doing the procedure naturally.
Oh, right.
So, it's leading, and she had the smarts to be like, okay, I can see where this is going.
Yeah.
Thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah.
Whereas I think, it worries me that there's possibly people out there that
cheap doesn't always mean better. That's
Truly.
like a pretty big mantra I live by. And, when it comes to fertility treatments, be careful.
Yeah,
please.
truly.
Before we move on, we talk all the time about planning and growing our wealth, but protecting that wealth is just as important. That's why having the right insurance in place can help when life goes unexpectedly.
And that's why this episode is brought to you by Partners Life, a New Zealand operated award-winning insurance provider with over 300,000 Kiwis insured and 89% of claims paid.
Partners Life understand that having some insurance is better than having no insurance. They have flexible and personalized solutions for any budget or situation.
Check out their website in our show notes below.
So we talked about the cost of an IVF round in New Zealand and, obviously other countries, but the cost of freezing your eggs, that's a separate procedure. So that has its own costs. And something that's unique to like the egg freezing thing is you actually have to pay for the storage of the eggs as well.
Yes.
So that can be, I'd say, like quite an ongoing cost depending on how long you wait to actually unfreeze the eggs.
Yeah, that's definitely something to take into consideration when you're looking into egg freezing. And I think this is more of a procedure if you like I said, like me, a bit on the fence. Maybe you've been focusing on work and other things, and you kind of want to buy yourself a little bit of time. Better to do it sooner rather than later. From the research we've done, the longer you wait, the less likely that your eggs are going to be healthy. So the sooner you do it, the healthier the eggs are, but also you have less money when you're younger. So it's not as easy, much easier said than done. So the two parts to the egg freezing, the collection and freezing, $8,000 plus medication costs of around $3,800 to $4,900 for the first cycle. So we're looking at, quite easily 13 grand, 10 to 13 grand there.
Yeah. So if you add that, like you take that as your initial step, and then later down the road, if you need to make those embryos and go through I don't know how you describe that, but the rest of it, that's also insane cost. And then the storage fees, about $230 for 6 months of storage, $460 for a year. Like, it adds up.
It does add up, especially if you're if we're looking at 10 years, $2,000, I guess that the storage is probably less of a concern, but definitely something you need to factor in because you prepay it.
I have also heard too, when it comes to freezing your eggs, it's not as simple as just every time I don't want to go in there and get some eggs. They don't always get enough, or any. It's not as simple as just we'll freeze your eggs.
Like
so
the retrieval's going to work every time.
You could go through the beginning stages of paying for the medication and all of that, and then have no eggs come of it and have to do it again.
That's what makes all of this so difficult, is that it's quite murky. With you're going in, we're giving ballpark figures, but it's so dependent on the person, your health, etc. And it's you sort of enter into it actually, first of all, not knowing if it's going to work, or secondly, how much it is going to end up costing you personally.
Yeah.
And I think there's an aspect of, we've sort of talked about biases in some of our previous podcasts. There's a bit of a sunk cost bias too. You kind of think, well, I've come this far, I've spent 20 grand, I might as well keep.
I put stress on my body.
Totally. Gone through the emotional ups and downs. I've come this far, do I just keep going until it works?
Yeah.
So in that respect, I think people probably find themselves throwing more and more money at it until they get the result that they want.
Definitely.
Once your eggs have been frozen, there's also the future thawing, insemination process. So that's looking at about $8,000 plus medication. Those costs are as of December 2023.
Crazy.
So they've probably gone up.
It is crazy. And with so freezing your eggs, we saw an increase in this post-COVID, because I was saying earlier about, I wonder if it's because you had all those years lost, but there is data that the egg freezing retrievals increased by 39% from the pre-pandemic level to the post-pandemic. That's in the US, but I'm sure it's similar here. It just seems to be something that's more on people's minds.
Yeah, I wonder if it's a combination of, more women these days are pursuing their careers as a priority. It could also be that COVID was a really scary time to have kids. I know quite a few of my friends had children around that time, and it was scary, because especially if you take ourselves back to right at the beginning, we didn't really know what this was or what it meant. So I can understand why people have put it off from that perspective as well.
Yeah, I think most of my friends actually had their babies during the pandemic. I think it was maybe a boredom thing. I don't know. But yeah, it was, you don't really, bringing a child into the world at that time was real iffy, especially you don't know if it's going to go on much longer. Is it almost over? It was a weird time.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, we talked a lot about like IVF and egg freezing and all of that jazz. But you know what this also makes me think of is like surrogacy.
Yeah, as an option.
Yeah. But I found it interesting. In the US, you can get paid to be a surrogate, right? So a lot of people will just offer it as a service. Like,
crazy. Some people love being pregnant.
yeah,
They're quite happy
exactly.
to do
And
it.
you get paid like pretty well in the US to be a surrogate. I think it was a first-time surrogate between 45,000 and 55,000 USD, but you can get paid up to 70,000, and honestly, probably more if you were doing it for like
Kim
a
Kardashian.
high-profile family that doesn't.
Kim used a surrogate.
Yeah,
I think.
she twice, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
she's
it's
not
it's
got time
quite
to be
common.
pregnant.
No.
So,
But
there you go.
yeah, I thought that was interesting, and I think to be a surrogate in the US and probably here too, you have to be pregnant once before you do it to prove that you can like carry a healthy
Oh, that
pregnancy
makes
to term.
sense. Yeah.
So you can't just do it. You can't just go, oh yeah, I need 50 grand. I'm
Sign
gonna
me
like
up.
have someone else's baby. You
Yeah.
do have to be like pre-screened in New Zealand and a lot of other countries. So for example, Canada, Denmark, Brazil, Britain, and Australia. You can do surrogacy, but you can't be paid for it. So it's called altruistic surrogacy.
That feels like a better system. I feel
Well,
like people could be
yeah.
although if you're happy to offer a service and people are happy to pay you for it, does seem like a win-win. But I also feel like people could potentially be exploited. if there's money
Exploited, and
being
I also
exchanged.
thought like I mean, obviously you'd be in it for the money in the US, I would say. But you could have people that are maybe, lying about their medical history and getting paid for surrogacy while not actually being like a healthy person to be doing it.
Healthy
Like you could put someone else's baby at risk if you're just in it for the money and you're lying
Yeah.
about your background.
Whereas the
versus
altruistic method is the intrinsic.
you're doing it
want
because you want
to
to help. Yeah.
Yeah, where I actually know somebody who, this is crazy, because I used to be a swimming instructor, and there was a family who had been through many rounds of IVF and really struggled to get pregnant, and she was a teacher, and one of her workmates offered to be their surrogate.
That's so nice.
I know.
Would you be my surrogate?
Probably.
Weird.
So I just thought that was so lovely, like, offering that to your friend or
Yeah.
workmate's pretty incredible gift to give someone. And so they had their first child, and then while the mother was breastfeeding with the first child, because apparently that's something you can do, they got pregnant naturally with the second child.
Oh, no way.
Amazing. Yeah,
Wow.
so it was a double miracle.
I almost wonder if having the stress lifted off your
I wonder
shoulders
that.
of not having to worry about like you have a healthy baby growing and you don't have to think about it anymore.
I wondered that
like,
too.
Less stress on your body. Yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
so interesting.
That's kind of like Phoebe Buffay in Friends when she has her brothers.
The three, and
twins,
she always says to
triplets.
people, I'm carrying my brother's children.
Yeah.
And people look at her funny. Yeah, no, that is exactly what she
Yeah,
did,
but
wasn't
no,
it?
it's not. Yeah, you can't get paid for this in New Zealand, but in a lot of other countries you can. I think it was India, Russia, and the Ukraine, as well as the US, you can get paid.
Interesting. Not something I would sign myself up for willingly, I don't think. Anytime soon.
Nah, I think I'd be stressed out. Like, if you get like sick or something and you're carrying someone else's child and you'd be like, ooh.
It's like when you look after someone else's kid in general,
It's like
you're like, this is
extreme babysitting.
Yeah, exactly. It is. You had told me when we were doing the research for this, you were telling me about a documentary on Netflix that sort of ties into all of
yes. Okay, I don't know how many people listening to this have seen this, but there's a documentary on Netflix called, I think it's A Man with 1,000 Kids, but I think he has more than 1,000 kids. And earlier when you mentioned you read that story on Reddit of the woman that was getting scammed and the guy was saying like, I can just donate
do it
sperm and
naturally.
do it naturally.
Oof.
He started out doing something similar, like he was offering private sperm donations for women that were struggling to have a baby. But sick and twisted guy, he was going all over the world to like different countries and signing up at like sperm banks or selling it or whatever. And he had so many children all around the world that it became an issue that
An incest
people were worried about the fact that their kid
Oh.
may be related to all the other kids in the city or the town, and how are they going to meet someone? And and then you've got all these
At
siblings
risk.
that you don't know about. It's a very interesting documentary, but it's such a point that, you know, you should be doing these things at a clinic that's got a reputation and not off Craigslist or Trade Me.
Yeah,
like we
they have
here.
rules in place around how much sperm you can donate for that exact reason to
Yes.
avoid accidental incest. So like there is
Yeah.
a reason for that. And yeah, again, maybe you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
Yeah. So from a planning perspective, for people who are trying to factor in these costs and make these decisions, I think the main thing that I got out of this was that, you know, sit down and think about what your goals are, what's important to you. If you've got a partner, are we on the same page? What are we doing here? Making sure you've had those conversations really clearly, because this is not a small amount of money for most people to be throwing around and making decisions on. And then I would recommend going back and looking at our Budgeting 101 episode, work out your budget. And the idea is here, if you're having to save up for these costs, you've got money coming in, you've got your fixed costs, you have a little bit of fun, and then hopefully you've got a surplus at the end. And what we do with that surplus should be intentional, otherwise it finds a way out the door. And that should be what's helping us work towards our goals. You know, and if you look at the surplus, look at the cost of all these things, IVF, egg freezing, etc., and work out how long it's actually going to take you to achieve the goal, then at least you've got a timeline, you know, you're planning for it. It's not something that people do end up taking out debt to fund these costs because they kind of get taken off guard by how expensive they are, or like they haven't thought ahead about the goal or the purpose or where they are with these things. So that would be our advice.
Yeah, I think for me, like, I don't have kids yet, and I like where I'm going with my career, and I've never really thought about these costs associated. So it was really interesting to learn about like how much this actually can cost. So for me, I really liked that. But it's not that weird to say to your financial advisor that you want to budget for this or plan for this.
No.
We've had clients that are taking out a mortgage, and they go, I know I have this much in my savings account, but actually I want to keep aside $50,000 because we want to go through IVF, or we want to, it's not weird. Like, it's part of your budget. Family planning is part of your life.
Oh, that's one of the main things. Yeah, that's one of the main things I ask people about when I first have a discovery meeting with them. The things that we talk about, this might help some people. If you're sitting down with your partner and thinking about your goals, the main things we touch on are, where are you living? Are you happy there for the foreseeable future? Or do you plan to move? So owner occupied home, what's your lifestyle like now, and are you happy with it? Future you. So when are we retiring? Are we looking at part-time? Are we working to 65, etc.? And do you have kids, or do you want kids in the near future? So that is always a question I ask people. Like, if you've got kids, how do you want to help them? Or are kids in the plan somewhere? So that is one of the first things I ask somebody.
Family planning, financial planning.
Very closely tied together. Cool. I think we'll wrap up there for today. Thanks so much for listening. And thanks to Partners Life for sponsoring this episode. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.